Welcome to KRQE's New Mexico News Insiders, 2025 Regional Edward R. Murrow Award winner for Best Podcast. Here's Gabrielle Burkhart and Chris McKee.
Well, happy 2026. I want to acknowledge for our viewers that we are in a new podcast studio here at KRQE. It's very nice.
New studio. It's a lot quieter for us. Hopefully our viewers and listeners will enjoy the place change as well.
Yeah, new ambiance.
Indeed.
I appreciate it. Well, today we're talking about a really interesting subject. It's officially been 2 years since we and the public learned about a major public corruption scandal in New Mexico. It involves police officers, drunk drivers, and defense attorneys. It's a scheme that spans at least 3 law enforcement departments, and it's something that our KRQE Investigates team has been following since the beginning.
Yeah, that includes you and Ann Pierret, who is going to join us here today. You guys have done extensive reporting on this subject into how that scheme worked, the players behind it, and the continued accountability portion, really, of this whole thing. So let's bring in our guest here today, KRQE investigative reporter Ann Pierret, who recently looked into another thread, or a few more threads of this story. Ann, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, well, we appreciate your expertise. And to remind our viewers and listeners, when this all started, it was back in January 2024. Federal investigators, they raided police officers' homes tied to this DWI corruption scheme. And basically, the scheme saw officers working alongside an attorney to get DWI cases dismissed in exchange for under-the-table payments and other benefits. That obviously leads to credibility questions, and to start 2024, hundreds of pending DWI cases were dismissed. That was the jump-off point for your latest investigation, right? What happened to those hundreds of defendants who got this free pass?
Yeah, had to be dismissed. Keyword there, if you're talking to the district attorneys, this was not something that they wanted to do. Right. Of course, not letting people off the hook, but the defendants just saw their cases dismissed, and these are people who were caught by Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office deputies, specific ones, Albuquerque police specific officers, and then a New Mexico State police officers. So as you mentioned, yes, this all started in January of 2024, this was as people were added to what's called the Brady-Giglio list.
Yeah, which we will get into a little bit later here, but yeah. The case dismissals. I think importantly, it wasn't the facts of the case that mattered in that dismissal, right? It was all about who was doing the investigative work on the case.
Yes, whoever their arresting officer was, if they were implicated by the feds in this, what we've dubbed the DWI dismissal scandal, they were no longer considered credible. They couldn't so all of their open pending cases had to be dismissed. I checked in weekly earlier on in January of 2024, somehow 2 years ago now, with the Bernalillo County DA's office, just asking for a tally, how many more cases. And Gabby and I looked closely at a lot of those cases. And so just now, as of December 31, 2025, that was my cutoff date, 306 cases have been dismissed in connection to these officers being deemed no longer credible. And I went through, in my most recent piece, all 306 defendants' court records, looked at the date their case was dismissed, and then looked to see did any of them reoffend. And of course found 10% of them did reoffend, 28 defendants, 3 of them twice. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Some pretty interesting developments to dig into, and also I think speaks to the work as an investigative reporter following the story. It's really interesting to learn.
Yeah, and for this most recent investigation, you showed lapel videos from some of those cases where the drivers are once again in trouble for DWI. You interviewed Albuquerque Police Lieutenant Lawrence Monty, who now oversees the DWI unit, and also Linda Atkinson. She's the executive director of the DWI Resource Center, longtime advocate here in New Mexico who studied our state's problem with drunk driving. One thing they both told you in this story that struck me is that neither of them are surprised that people have reoffended, but when I really sit with that information, unfortunately, I'm not surprised either. Were you?
I guess not. You'd hope, right, that these people would not reoffend, but at the same time, and kind of as Linda mentions in the story, there's no impact to have any sort of behavior change when it's the officer, the person who's supposed to be holding you accountable, the person who's supposed to uphold the law, who you're almost supposed to be scared by, right? They've just pulled you over. You could lose your job from having a charge like this, a criminal charge like this, and they were the ones who it's alleged were criminals, or who some have admitted to being criminals. So there's no behavior change. And it's interesting, too, I was thinking about this, like, we've known for some time that there's a DWI, there's a drunk driving problem here in our state. Now that we know this scheme existed for 30 years, what we don't know is the impact of this scheme, in terms of what impact has this scheme had on our drunk driving problem? Because there are two groups of people, right? There are people who paid to get their case just to disappear. And there's no behavior change there, right? If you're not held accountable and you can pay your way out of any sort of punishment. But then there's this other group, this new group, these 306, same sort of thing, no accountability. So
no consequences for
right.
something that should have very strict consequences in our state. If the whole theory is, cracking down on DWI, which you see the billboards across New Mexico, it's something we should really care about.
Yeah.
Also, some of these people that you found in their court records, they would have faced harsher consequences for things like a 5th or 6th DWI offense had it not been for this forced case dismissal in 2024, right? Tell me about that.
Yeah, and those are the people who, unfortunately, you really aren't surprised that they reoffended, because there's clearly some sort of problem. Drunk driving can 100% be fueled by addiction, not just a fun night out. And those were hard cases to read. But what's interesting there, yes, when a case is dismissed or when there's no conviction, the penalty changes. So they were arrested for the 6th time, but this will only technically be their 5th conviction if they get convicted. That's a difference of 6 months in jail. So it's 12 months mandatory time for a 5th, 18 months for a 6th conviction.
Yeah, so real consequence there. I want to get more into how these cases got dismissed, because we were about to talk about that here sort of in the beginning, the why behind it. Again, this is more than 300 criminal cases across Bernalillo, Sandoval, Valencia counties that were dismissed as a result of this corruption scheme. And basically it's because the officers involved in these DWI arrests, they were put on something called the Bradio-Giglio list. If you can explain that list to us, what is it? What does it mean?
Yeah, so these started actually in, we've shared the letter before from the U.S. Attorney's Office telling the district attorney, and it's their determination whether or not to put somebody on the Brady-Giglio list, but that they are no longer considered credible. So if you put them on the stand in court, you're going to lose because they're not a credible witness anymore. And yeah, you just can't trust their testimony. So the majority of these officers are on the Bernalillo County Giglio list. It's the state police officer who is connected to the Valencia Sandoval County case. And that's only, I believe it was like 5 or 6 cases that were dismissed in that county, but so the rest, the 300 in Bernalillo County. And those dismissals, as we mentioned, started in January of 2024 when names got added. And the DA's office had the task of then looking at all of these officers' open cases. And the most recent person to be added was added in June of 2025. So 18 months of officers being added and this kind of rolling number of more and more case dismissals. But one of them, I think it's, again, 5 or so of them, the most recent cases to be dismissed were in November of last year. So we still could see more dismissed.
So basically, you get on this list, your credibility is questioned. Prosecutors know if that person is an investigating officer on the case, there's no way I can credibly bring this case forward because my main investigator witness person has been deemed incredible or uncredible.
And
Right.
one thing to note in those cases is, there are criminal cases where you don't just rely on one officer's testimony, right? Like prosecutors can still win certain cases if they need another witness, that was there. But DWI is kind of unique insofar as like you're usually only pulled over by one officer and he has to testify to the facts of his own arrest. But if he's no longer credible to take the stand, that's why we've seen these hundreds of dismissals.
And we've asked, too, about body camera footage, right? Because, we've shown body camera footage from a lot of these arrests, but the defense has the right to question every witness. You cannot question body camera footage. You can't put body camera footage up on a stand. So that's also
Another
a piece of
issue.
This. Yes.
We'll be right back with more of the New Mexico News Insiders.
KRQE News 13 Investigations. One of the biggest cons in New Mexico history. How did they get away with it?
Well, they had an accomplice, the state of New Mexico.
A road rage encounter leads to murder.
I miss him every single day.
Did the judicial system fail here?
New Mexico's families, homes, and lives are left in ashes.
There's a level of anxiety.
FEMA has been an abject and abysmal failure.
Watch anytime on KRQE.com or our YouTube channel.
So there are more officers on this Giglio list than have been federally charged or taken guilty pleas in the scheme. So I think we need to address like this discrepancy for the public. We have made our own internal database tracking officers and their overlapping cases with former defense attorney Thomas Clear III. He is the proclaimed ringleader of this criminal conspiracy. He admitted in his federal guilty plea to RICO conspiracy charges, saying that he led the scheme since 1995. So for 30 years, conspiring with officers for extra cash in exchange for his clients' DWI dismissals. But over the last year, we've really seen a slower trickle of people actually facing federal charges in this scheme, to include law enforcement officers, now 2 defense attorneys. That includes Thomas Clear III and Rudy Chavez. Also Clear's paralegal, Rick Mendez, who was the very first to take a guilty plea. So to timestamp ourselves, we're recording this at the end of January 2026. And remind us how many officers and from what agencies that we've actually seen plead guilty in federal court, face charges in the scheme, and what should we expect next?
Yes, as recently as last week, the number is now 10 officers, 9 of them Albuquerque police officers, 1 of them a Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office deputy. But, yeah, as you may be getting to, there are 6 others on that Giglio list, the Brady Giglio list. So again, not charged with anything, just implicated, believed to have been involved. Something happened that the U.S. Attorney's Office felt the need to tell the DA's office, we don't think that they're a credible witness anymore, and you need to do something with their open cases.
And one question I know you and I have gotten is like, okay, if Tom Clear admits that this goes back to 95, are they looking at retired officers? How long could this list go?
And we've asked that. I think the Brady Giglio list is the best bet for them going after retired officers who may have another job, or looking into their law license or their looking into their officer license. The problem that we have heard is that it could be difficult to prove anything from 30 years ago, any allegations. But Timothy McCarson, who was an Albuquerque police officer, he is the one who was retired who so far has pled guilty in this. So we've got 1. There could be more coming. We just aren't sure yet.
So let's talk about one of the latest former officers to plead guilty to conspiracy in this DWI scheme. That is former APD Lieutenant Justin Hunt. Court records tied to his plea as well are pretty revealing, as in revealing new information about this scheme. What did we learn from this?
And he did retire also, right, from APD?
Yes, amid the scandal.
Yeah.
He was the first to go. Mm-hmm. He was the highest ranking and the first to say, I'm out. But this was after the
scandal was
named
exposed,
him,
so to speak.
Yes. But he wasn't charged back then when he retired.
Right. Just charged January 20th of 2026.
Yeah. Okay. So tell us, what'd you learn?
Yeah, so it was actually really interesting. We'd been waiting for him for some time because he's a sergeant, and we learned he was involved for 10 years, all the way up until the day that we learned that federal investigators had been looking at this scheme, so January 18th of 2024. And he would have started, he said, in his plea deal in 2014, so 10 years of running this scheme. With him being a sergeant, him being higher up, we know he was used by the ringleaders, Thomas Clear, his paralegal, to really get other officers involved. They trusted him, so they're going to kind of follow what he's doing and believe everything's okay, I guess. But we also, the biggest thing we learned was that he was working with Mendez, the paralegal, Thomas Clear's paralegal, Rick Mendez, to target people. There's one example in there where Mendez took a former client of Clear's, and court record shows that, he had previously hired Clear for a DWI, so they knew the guy. Claims they took him out for his birthday to a strip club, got him drunk, and then Mendez called Hunt and said, hey, so-and-so is leaving. This is his route back to wherever he's going.
And then, here's the vehicle.
Mm-hmm, and here's the description of the vehicle, the person's name, and sure enough, Hunt then pulled him over, DWI, and extorted the guy, because we've learned, right, that it's $7,000 to $10,000 that these people were paying. So cashing in a couple $1,000 more on that night.
In this plea deal, Hunt also admits that Mendez was in the vehicle.
Right.
And he left that information out of his own police report.
Of the criminal complaint.
Yeah.
So
wild.
Yes. What's frustrating is in 2014, it's unclear if there was body camera at APD just yet. Some people had it, some didn't. So we are working to try to get a closer look at that, because it would be a really interesting case to highlight for everybody.
Yeah. Just wild that they were actually taking people out, targeting drunk drivers, and then tipping off the officers, hey, so-and-so is drunk in this vehicle. Here's where they'll be.
Right. And we don't know how many people they did that to.
Yeah. And then, in turn, how that would work then is they'd say, we know a guy who can get you off. Mm-hmm. They'd coordinate with Tom Clear.
Heck, he's sitting in the car next to him.
Yeah.
Oh, I can get you off this.
Yeah.
It's like
they pay.
No more clear example of why this is called an enterprise. It was the whole way through. It's incredible.
Yeah. Crazy. To date, several plea deals reference that Clear was working with officers from APD, BCSO, and New Mexico State Police. So far, only one Bernalillo County Sheriff's Deputy, Jeffrey Hammerl, has pleaded guilty to his role in the scheme. As of this recording, one New Mexico State Police officer has been implicated in the scheme by way of that Giglio list that we talked about, tying him to the federal investigation. That is New Mexico State Police former Sergeant Toby Lefebvre, also known in New Mexico as the DWI King. I highlighted his cases in a KRQE investigation showing that state police placed him on leave in February of last year. He stayed on administrative leave for months. State police at the time said that they placed him on leave after they were notified that he was under federal investigation. Lefebvre was then quietly fired in October of 2025. I was told by New Mexico State Police that a misconduct report was filed against his law enforcement certification, but notably, the Department of Public Safety will not release those records to me, citing an exemption under our public records law. So to date, Lefebvre nor any officer with state police has been charged with a crime related to this scheme. And the same goes for a lot of other officers on that Giglio list, right? Not all of them are charged. And so far, no one has been sentenced yet, which is another thing we keep reminding people at the end of all our reporting lately.
Right. Yeah. So I think I mentioned this earlier, 5 officers who are on that list, including now former Sergeant Toby Lefebvre of New Mexico State Police, and then former BCSO Undersheriff Johan Herreño. And then so that would make then 3 APD officers have not yet been charged. So we're keeping an eye on federal records to see if their names will pop up. It's also possible that they don't just take a plea, that they are indicted. Again, a plea being immediately admitting, this is what I did, here's my confession, no trial or anything like that, an indictment, a criminal charge, and kind of following through the typical what we see, going to trial, having to prove the case, all of that. But yeah, the next step after a plea would be sentencing. And we've been keeping an eye on that, trying to ask questions. As you mentioned, when are these happening? My best guess is that they're waiting for everybody. I mean, there could be part of those agreements that just aren't written out, that some of these officers who did plea, who did admit, they could be helping, giving information that leads to other people. So maybe they're trying to get it all together first, right? Tie it up with a bow and then sentence these people. But yeah, that is one thing. When former Sergeant Justin Hunt was, former Lieutenant Justin Hunt was pled guilty last week. That was a big question from a lot of viewers is, so,
yeah,
what's up with the other people?
We'll be right back with more on New Mexico News Insiders.
Hey guys, Chad Brummett here with New Mexico Frontiers, the KRQE original series that focuses on tech and innovation happening right here in New Mexico. We've got a lot of great stories about various businesses, technology, and of course space exploration. So make sure that you follow us on air at KRQE and Fox New Mexico, as well as our KRQE YouTube channel online. In the meantime, let's get back to the New Mexico News Insiders.
I think that's a question we continue to get, because the other frustrating part of this is, these are law enforcement officers now on the criminal side admitting that they have been conducting crimes, essentially. And we haven't really been able to hold them to the same account that we would a normal citizen, because we can't even see their court hearings because it's federal court and cameras aren't allowed.
Right. And, Linda Atkinson mentioned too on the sentencings, again, she's the executive director of the DWI Resource Center. She said to me, what message is this sending that there haven't been sentences yet? It's been a year that since they've taken these plea deals, since they've admitted to this, and yet they're still just out there scot-free. Like, what message is that, And take that as you will, right? It's frustrating for a lot of people.
Well, a question to the sentencing element, because if we keep in mind that the investigation really unfolded under a different U.S. attorney that was a Democratic appointment under President Joe Biden, Alexander Ubaez. He was overseeing the office when this investigation began. We now know, obviously, since the Trump administration has taken the reins in the White House, there's been a change in leadership. That office is being led by Ryan Ellison now. And I just wanted to ask you, obviously, change in leadership, change in political styles. What insight might we have, if any at all at this point, about whether these officers will see punishment in the eyes of the law for this? Any indication you have at all about if these officers will go to prison or what might happen in terms of the sentencing in these cases?
Yeah. What I'm hearing from a lot of people is that, yes, maybe the political party piece of it does matter. We've seen under U.S. Attorney Ryan Ellison that the focus is the border, right? So maybe that's where all of the attention is, and it's not so much on this massive public corruption scandal happening up here in Albuquerque. But from what I can tell from looking through court records is the same team is on these investigations. So it does not appear that they've really messed too much with the people who have been on it for the last 2 years. Yeah. So again, maybe it really is. They're just waiting to kind of get everybody and then move forward with it. But If I could mention one thing too about sentencing, when you asked about Lieutenant Hunt, specific to his sentencing, there's and I've got it in front of me from his agreement. It says that he and the United States, the government, the feds, have an agreement that he will not be sentenced to anything more than 57 months. 57 months is a little more than 4.5 years. And this is a charge that's 20 years, comes with a 20-year sentence. So that's huge, and something we didn't see in any of the other plea agreements.
Yeah, this type of deal, so to speak.
Yes, very much a deal. They don't like it when you call it a plea deal. They like plea agreement, but this is a deal when you really look at it.
Right.
Some might call it a sweetheart deal,
yes,
is another term we're hearing getting thrown around.
Well, and then the other piece of it is he's entitled to, quote, a reduction of up to 3 levels for acceptance of responsibility. Everybody else was entitled to a reduction of up to 2 levels. And that included Thomas Clear, the third, the attorney who admitted to being the ringleader here. But this is a guy who admitted he spent 10 years doing this. He is the highest ranking so far officer to be charged, admitted, confessed to being a part of this. And so it really makes you question, what did he say?
What information is
what
he
does
giving?
he know?
Yeah.
Right, right.
Why would one get clearly a little bit more of a deal in this case? That's a good question.
Well, and one thing to note on the sentencing and punishment, again, we're dealing with federal agents, federal court, federal prosecutors, and typically they are pretty tight-lipped as far as information. Even, under Ubaez's administration, like Ann and I were not getting heads up about any of these hearings, or we just had to do our own due diligence and search in court records, which we're still doing to this day. And they're not gonna tell us, hey, sentencing will be on this date. We're just having to pay attention to the courtrooms for that. So that is not atypical of federal court, I would say.
That's true.
To just not tell us. But we can kind of, just based on our own expertise, give our best educated guess as to why it hasn't happened.
I will say typically, though, after there's an indictment or a plea, something happening major in a case, we'll get a press release. I think we got like 3 or 4 of them just today from the U.S. Attorney's Office announcing charges against people or sentences against people or, a plea deal, whatever. So I've asked the U.S. Attorney's Office,
why aren't you sending press releases about these plea agreements? And we weren't really given a clear answer.
Yeah.
So seems like a decision on their part.
Right.
Well, very much this is a still developing story.
Yeah.
And we know both of you, Ann and Gabby, you're going to be continuing to follow this. But is there anything else that either one of you would like to add or hope people understand more? I'll start with you, Ann.
Yeah, I really just want the public, the community to know we're on this. We continue to discuss this scandal once a week. I mean, at least at the bare minimum once a week. Just what more can we tell viewers? What more can we dig into? What more do people need to know? And that's kind of how this idea in the first place of this story came about, of looking at, all these people who got the free pass. What did they do with it? So yeah, we're paying attention, we're asking questions, and we'd really encourage people to continue to reach out to us if they had any interactions with these officers, if they have any concerns, if they have any questions. I feel like we know a lot at this point, so happy to share what we do know, what we can share.
Yeah, and I think this is part of what Ann and I appreciate about the job is holding the powerful accountable. These are people who you should be able to trust on the street. And I think law enforcement higher ups have made it clear in the last year that they really do want to earn back the public's trust. And, APD, we know, has made a lot of reforms and policy changes as a result of this whole investigation. So, but as you and I and everybody at this table knows, you can't necessarily just take everybody's word for something. So we will definitely keep digging, looking at records, and following these plea agreements all the way to the end, whenever sentencing will be.
Whenever that is.
Yeah.
Well, Ann, thank you for joining us here today for this discussion. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Again, a thanks to Ann Pierret for discussing her latest investigation, which we will put a link to here in our comments section. Obviously, a lot more to keep track of as the months go on.
Yeah, and notably, we do have a landing page on KRQE.com for all of our extensive DWI-related coverage, which we can also link to in the show notes. If you've got any story ideas or people you'd like to hear from on our show, always feel free and reach out. I'm Gabrielle.Burkhardt at KRQE.com via email and GBurkNM on social media.
I'm at Chris McKee TV, also Chris.McKee at KRQE.com. Thanks for watching and listening.